It is June 16th, 2023, and I'm here with Peggy Smith, and we are going to interview her about her life as a family member of a Vietnam War veteran, and other people. Dean Rusk was your father, the Secretary of State. Um, we're here at the Virginia Museum of History and Culture, and I have Paige Newman and Danny Flakes who are helping me with this interview. We're going to start with asking you to state your full name.
Margaret Elizabeth Rusk Smith.
Did you keep all your names when you got married, or did you drop the Rusk?
I dropped the Elizabeth.
I dropped the list, so you put Rusk in the middle.
Margaret R. Smith is how I sign my name.
Mm-hmm. And what year were you born?
I was born in 1949
And where were you born?
in Washington, D.C.
In Washington, D.C. And what were your parents' names?
David Dean Rusk, but he dropped David, so he's known as Dean Rusk. And Virginia Winifred Foisey Rusk.
How do you spell her maiden name?
Foisey, F-O-I-S-I-E.
Okay. And what was your dad doing when you were born?
He was 1949, and he was working in Washington. We lived in Park Fairfax, Virginia, and he had an undersecretary type job. So he was already in government.
And then did your mother work in the home? Or
She was a housewife of her era and mother.
And you had siblings?
I have an older brother, David, who's 9 years older, and my brother, Richard, who was 3 years older, is no longer living.
I'm sorry to hear that. So where did you attend high school?
Woodrow Wilson High School, Washington, D.C.
So did you live your whole childhood in D.C.?
No. I lived my, up until President Kennedy was elected, we lived in Scarsdale, New York, in Westchester County.
Mm-hmm.
A very comfortable, privileged life. My father was president of the Rockefeller Foundation, and it was, I don't know if you're familiar with Scarsdale, but it's a very nice place to grow up. And he supported Adlai Stevenson in 1960. In fact, he had bought a $100 plate dinner ticket that neither he nor my mother could go to. So they sent me, 10 years old, to represent the family, which I enjoyed very much. And we actually saw quite a bit of Mr. Stevenson. He was ambassador to the UN for a while. And very sweet man, very nice. And I enjoyed his company a lot. But, so I don't know who my father voted for in that election, but he's been a lifelong Democrat. But he felt strongly that it's your vote is secret, private, and so he would never tell us who he voted for. But I imagine he voted for Mr. Kennedy. And 10 days after the election, he got a phone call to go down to Palm Beach. First time he'd ever met
Mr. Kennedy.
And that is when Mr. Kennedy asked him to be Secretary of State.
So he had no idea, like he wasn't on the radar?
No idea. Absolutely no idea. Wasn't looking for it. Loved his job at the Rockefeller Foundation. Loved being in Scarsdale. He called my mother from Palm Beach. He says, we have 10 days to move to Washington. Of course, my mom goes, And so we did.
So how old were you then when you moved?
I was 11.
You're 11.
And he took a 50% pay cut to be Secretary of State. And we didn't have any personal money. So it was tough financially for him to do it.
Did you get anything like housing or?
No.
No.
He had to buy his own house, which he did. It was about a third the size of the one that we had in
New York.
New York. But it was convenient to the State Department. And we moved in there. My brother Richard, my older brother, had already married and established his own household. And from that time on, I hardly ever saw either one of them. I went to public school. My parents believed in public school. So I had to walk to the nearest bus station. They didn't have school buses, which took me to a transfer point. So I transferred and went down to the junior high, walked home, and took the bus home. Same thing for high school. And they were gone all the time.
So what was your mom doing?
Was
she
She was
engaged
doing-
in different activities than your dad? Like,
well, similar. She traveled with him, and they went to 50 countries during his term. And then she was wonderful. She was a very capable, smart woman, and I think the job in Washington really was great for her. Every time they went to a foreign country, she would get the names and numbers and contact information of all the Marines that were guarding the embassy. When she got back home, she would call their parents. She would say, "I saw your son." She'd do all this kind of thing. Yeah, she was great. And she went to every National Day reception in all the embassies that she could make, and I usually went with her. And in that way, I got extremely used to seeing people from all over the world, all different cultures, all different appearances, different food, different clothing, different language, different everything. So I grew up with difference being normal, which I really treasure, that experience. And so they were gone. Even when they were in Washington, they were out late, got home about 11 o'clock every night. I would sit by my window, especially after President Kennedy was killed. I would sit there and wait for the limousine to pull up, and the whole time he walked from the limousine to the house, I was praying that he wouldn't be shot. It was very traumatic.
this is kind of like out of order, but I was looking at the dates and I was thinking, JFK was assassinated during your dad's tenure, and then, 5 years later, MLK is assassinated. And in terms of your...
And Robert Kennedy, too.
Yeah. And in terms of your life experience, these are all like figures that would loom very large.
Right, and I had met them, I knew them. In fact, President Kennedy and Robert Kennedy, I saw them a lot, relatively, to most people, So it was a very real thing.
They were real people to you.
They were real people to me. And I remember when my father was flying to Japan with Mom when President Kennedy was shot. They turned the airplane around and came back to D.C. He got home very late, and I remember walking down the stairs to see him. He didn't see me coming down the stairs, and he was in the living room by himself, and I heard him one sob, which of course I'd never heard or even considered my father crying in my life. And I turned around and went back upstairs because I knew he wouldn't want me to see that. And for the next week before the funeral, he was at Andrews Air Force Base, constantly greeting all the foreign heads of state coming in. I watched the funeral procession from the same place I watched the inaugural, which was the bay window at Blair House in Washington by myself. Nobody was with me. I did not cry. 20 years later, when they were showing the anniversary footage on TV, I cried for a week. But
Maybe you felt like you couldn't do it then.
I just was too overwhelmed, I think. I don't know. It was. And then, of course, he stayed on during the Johnson administration. He and President Johnson had a lot more in common.
They were both Southerners.
Yes, and from similar backgrounds and so forth. My father was born in very poor circumstances. But in fact, well, no, that's another, I'll bring that in later.
Okay.
But anyway, okay, so I've kind of gone on and on, so.
No, this is what we want you to do in oral history, is to go on and on. So we're talking about Kennedy being assassinated, and then I talked about Kennedy and MLK, but how did it affect your family? Because I imagine there's an uncertainty when JFK dies, like it's not just losing the president and the country being in a unprecedented territory, like not since Lincoln or whatever, what I mean? But also your dad's job is, like not, this, don't know that his service is going to be continued into the next presidency.
I don't think there was any doubt about that.
Okay, so he knew that Johnson.
And he would have been fine if it had not. He never wanted to be Secretary of State.
Because he was just called to do it.
He was called to do it. In fact, and somebody asked me, well, if he had all this great thing going and he loved where he was, why did he do it? And my father said, because the president asked me. The president asks you to do something, you do it.
And he had a military background. Your
Yes,
father
he
had
did.
served in the military, so obviously the president is the commander of the troops, so it's kind of like in a
And my
hierarchy.
father served in the CBI theater during World War II. And
So then after JFK is assassinated and then Johnson takes office, how old are you then?
let's see, I was born in 49, so 63.
14?
13, something like that.
And
14.
your brother that's 3 years older than you, he's just doing different things?
He had his friends at high school. We really never did anything together. I mean, we saw each other, we didn't fight, ever. But he was doing his thing, and he wanted nothing to do with official Washington.
Because so just to like jump ahead a little bit, like your brother wasn't drafted, right? But he moved far away.
Which, Richard?
Yeah.
Yes. He did Marine Corps boot camp. But he wasn't drafted. And then he moved to Nome, Alaska, to get as far away from Washington as he could, but not leave the United States.
So this is the 3 years older brother, or is this? Okay.
Richard. And he lived there for 13 years. In fact, my parents, when Pop got out of office, actually visited him in Nome, which was, it's not easy to get to Nome. There are no roads going to Nome.
Yeah.
You have to fly, take the ship when the water's not frozen, or dog sled.
It's a choice.
It's a choice. So, yeah, he did. He was very much against the war, Richard was, but he would not leave the country. I don't know why they didn't. He went to boot camp and did fine. Whether you have to be drafted after that, I don't know. I don't know exactly why he didn't.
Why you do
serve.
listen? So you go into your high school years, and you picked up the hobby. Have you always been a horseback
Yes.
rider, or
Yes,
show?
since I was a little kid, 9 years old. We had a choice. We went to a summer session out at Mills College where my mom used to, where she graduated from, and my father actually was dean of faculty there at the age of 25.
Wow.
And I had a choice between swimming or riding, and I took riding. And I loved it, and I loved it ever since. And I rode in Rock Creek Park. And that's how I ended up meeting my husband, riding.
So, was the riding, it was like a club, or was it a public thing?
No, it was a public stable. I never had my own horse. It was made very clear to me I would never have my own horse. Didn't stop me Christmas morning getting up and looking out the window like, is there a horse trailer there with a horse in it? But no. But yes,
So when you competed, did you borrow a horse, or?
well, I would ride a stable horse. Now, I take it back that I never had my own horse. My husband, when we got married, bought the school horse I was riding out in California and gave that to me as a wedding present.
Oh.
So since then, I did have some horses, and I spent my whole life teaching riding. You know, I did the horse thing and loved it.
So you go to Rock with.
I go to Rock Creek Park. I ride there. He was an assistant instructor. He was 5 years older than I was. And
So tell me about let's talk about your husband and his background. What is his full name?
Guy Gibson Smith.
Okay. And his parents, what are their names?
Clarence and Artinia Smith.
How do you spell it? Do you know how to spell Artinia?
Artinia.
And they live in Washington, D.C.
They lived in Washington, D.C., completely on the other side of the city. As you know, Washington was segregated back then. You couldn't buy. In fact, when my father bought the house in Spring Valley, there was this huge paragraph, because it was a W.C. and A. Miller housing project, of all the people that he wasn't allowed to sell to. And my father said, I'm not signing this contract until you take this out, which they did. But nonetheless, Washington was still very segregated, you know. But actually, my parents and Guy's parents were like bookends. They had both graduated from Howard. They were extremely well read and enjoyed classical music, and they'd both been in the Army. He had been in the Army like my father. The difference was when my father showed up to report to the new commanding officer, he was welcomed. When Guy's father showed up to report to his new commanding officer, he was greeted with, well, I didn't send for any niggers. You know?
But was did Guy's dad, because he had a college education, was he treated better? Like, did he get was he an officer or any kind of?
In his unit.
A segregated unit?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. They were both colonels. He ended up working in D.C. For some government agency. He was they were like each other. And, but this was really tragic. Growing up through that period, the Jim Crow period that he did, he knew how dangerous it could be. Okay? And so I saw the real Clarence Smith when I was with them. But when he was in a room full of white people, he had a different kind of artificial grin and kind of, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
What did,
he didn't want to ruffle any feathers.
right, and he was just, it wasn't he didn't want to show his intelligence, he didn't want to show his learning.
He didn't want to be a threat.
He didn't want to be a threat. It was so sad that he still couldn't shed that. And I understand why. And I found out later when I married Guy, I mean, there were instances when we experienced some of that same thing. And when we got married and we got mail sacks, huge canvas mail sacks full of mail, 75% of it was negative and threatening. Death threats like crazy. You know. So, I mean, it was still continued, the problems. I think it's gotten better, but.
Did Guy have any siblings?
No.
No, he's their only child.
Only child.
And
They sent him to private school because his mother worked in these public schools where they lived, and she realized that he wasn't going to get a decent education there. So they sent him to Georgetown Day School and Hawthorne Academy and Georgetown University. And he had to drive all the way across the city every day to go to Georgetown. He had to drive all the way across the city to come see me.
And it was fine for him to come, because you said the city was segregated, it was fine for him to come to your side of town? Like, there was no,
Well, it was
like, was there an
It was fine because, you know, he just came to see me and we lived in a, you know, small community. However, there was one incident when he got out of his car to come pick me up, and our next door neighbor had some friend visiting him or something, and the friend crossed the street and actually I think he was bringing me home from somewhere. Friend crossed the street and stood in front of us and would not let Guy cross the street. And they ended up getting in a fist fight rolling down the street. Yeah. Fortunately, our house had a quick, it was too small to have security men there all the time, but it had a very quick direct thing to the police. And I ran into the house and I set that thing off, and they were there very fast. And they broke it up, and they had a talk with the guy. We never saw him again. But.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so, obviously, did your husband face any discrimination in terms of getting into Georgetown, or his time at Georgetown? Was that?
I don't think, he never mentioned it. I never saw evidence of it. You know, I think he was probably the only Negro non-Catholic to be in Georgetown at that time. But he was. And he did fine. He graduated with honors.
What was his major?
He was an ROTC,
Uh-huh.
which is why he ended up.
Being a helicopter pilot?
Right.
So, he, but all this while, but you're 5 years younger, right?
Yes.
So he's in Georgetown while you're dating?
Yes. And I had skipped a grade. So half the year he was 5 years older than I was, the other half of the year he was 4 years older than I was. And we saw each other every day at the stables. And, go ahead.
Where did his interest in horses come from?
His father took him to the stables and ended up buying the horse that he enjoyed riding. And it says on the check, I still have the check, horse to be taken back and money to be refunded if Guy does not keep his grades up. He got him a horse to keep him out of trouble. And it worked, because he went every day to see that horse.
Uh-huh.
And that's where I met Guy, at the stables. And you have time for this
No,
really
we have
sappy
plenty,
story?
we have all the
Okay.
time.
All right, so here's the deal. He was 5 years older and very cute. We all had a crush on him. All the girls had a crush on him. And there was a horse show in the fall, but it was in the park, because not at the stables itself, so you had to ride to the showgrounds and then ride back. And he rode Western, I rode English, and he was in the pleasure division. And halfway through the pleasure division, he comes to me. He didn't have a pair to go in the pairs class, which counted for championship points in the pleasure division. He asked me if I would pair with him in the pairs class. Sure. So, then, as it turned out, right before the pairs class, this other rider who had come from another barn, another woman, was tied with Guy for the pleasure championship. And she didn't have anybody to go in the pairs class. So he comes back to me and he says, explain the situation. He said he didn't feel right about winning the championship just because she couldn't go in the class. Would I mind if he rode with her instead of me? I said, no, I didn't mind. But of course I did. I'm 14 years old, right? So I think, well, I took off and started riding through Rockford Park, 1,700 acres, mind you, by myself. And I thought, okay, I'll stay out after dark. And they'll get back, and I won't be back, and he'll be all worried I'm going to make him pay, right? Don't you love this 14-year-old mind at work? So I stay out until after dark. Get scared myself. Finally get back to the barn. The barn is dark. Not a soul around. And I'm thinking to myself, what? Y'all came and left and nobody cared. They don't care I'm not back. And the horse isn't back. And I'm starting to cry. I'm in the stall, brushing the horse, and the tears are rolling down my cheeks. Then I hear all this commotion. And what happened was the show had run late, and they had finished the show by the headlights of the cars. And they were all just getting back. So they all put their horses away and go home. And I hear these footsteps coming down the aisle, the cement aisle, and stopping outside my door. And I'm, going like this. And he said, may I give you a ride home? Sure. So he did. And on the way home, he asked me if I would go to the year-end banquet with him. And I said, well, I need to ask my mom. I'd love to, but I need to ask my mom. And he said, well, how about if I come to your home tomorrow afternoon at 5, and I ask your mom if I can take you to the dance? Now that killed 2 birds with 1 stone. Number one, it was very polite. Number 2, it put it right out there, right? The fact that he was African American and so forth. I thought it was brilliant. So anyway, he did. He came. Introduced himself to my mother, asked if he could take me to the dance. She said yes, and my mom was really a smart lady. She figured this wouldn't be our only date. So she laid down 3 rules for dating. Number 1, we could only have 1 official date a week. It didn't count when he escorted me to things. Number 2, it could not be on a school night. That's exactly how she said it. Number 3, I had to be home by 11 o'clock. We stuck by those rules until I went off to college. So I was already in college for a year, because I was a year ahead when he graduated from Georgetown. He drove all the way across the country and got a job, temporary job there, got an apartment, and he knew he was going to be going off to Vietnam. So that's why we decided to get married when we did.
Because
I wanted to be married.
Just resetting.
okay,
I wanted to be married before he left.
I hear people say that, like, that they wanted the person to be married before they went off to war.
Right.
Can you talk more about that feeling? Because Because, I mean, did you, in the years that you were dating from 14 to
18.
18,
Yeah, we got married when I was 18.
did you, I mean, that's such a young age, and, people get married, like, we get married so much older nowadays on average. And so, like, were you thinking marriage all along? Was that a thing, or did people just go out together?
That's a good question. The thing of it is that our 4 years together before we got married, I mean, I'm sure that when his father found out that he wanted to date me, I'm sure he said, not that he would have anyway, because God was a real gentleman, but I'm sure he said something like, "Don't you lay your hands on that girl." Back then, So we had 4 years to be friends, and we were best friends. And we stayed best friends all our married life. So the marriage, I wanted him to feel really, oh, what's the word? I just thought it would, for some reason, help him come back. And if he didn't come back in one piece, it'd still be all right, because I'd still be there. You know what I mean?
You wanted to feel supported.
Yes. And we wrote each other every single day. By the time, when I went to California, and all the time he was in Vietnam, and any time he was anywhere else on training, we wrote each other every single day. And he said that when they had mail call over Vietnam, the guys would be passing out a couple letters here and there, and then there'd be this big stack of mail.
Yeah, I just think about it, like, it's a very, like, it's so romantic to think that you're writing every day, but from a logistics standpoint of, like, keeping up with each other's lives, like, he probably had, like, there probably was a delay, and you guys are never writing, like, you would think, like, we just have phone calls, and I would be like, how are you today? But what did you do today, Peggy? You know what I mean? Like,
and they were everybody else would think they were very dull. I mean, it was just a description of what I did that day, and a lot of it was repetitious. I did the same thing all the time, and he never wrote me about the war, ever. He just asked questions about what was happening at home, and how the horses, and I mean, his letters weren't long.
mm-hmm.
But
do you think that he didn't write you about the war because he didn't want to talk about it, or because he couldn't talk about it, or because he didn't want you to worry about it?
probably all three. I mean, I don't know, but I don't think there was anything good to talk about. There was nothing uplifting to talk about, so he didn't put anything. He didn't want me to worry, and probably there was stuff he couldn't say. His letters then were mostly just asking questions and commenting on what I had written to him.
Yeah. Okay, so he graduates from Georgetown, then you have been accepted to Stanford after he graduates. So he moves to California.
No, I went to Stanford before he graduated.
Okay.
So I had a year and a summer session.
So you were long distance, like not by war, but long distance, like in your friendship for a year.
Yeah, and we wrote each other then, but also once a week I had a sack of quarters. And I would drop those quarters in to call him, because back then, that's how you call people, you drop,
They would give you a warning and you'd have to put more in.
Yeah. We'd talk a little bit.
Did you have to use a public phone? I'm just fascinated, like how.
A public phone in the dorm.
Uh-huh. So it was like a hallway phone.
Yeah.
So I mean, it must have been quite an accomplishment to be a woman in the 60s and going to Stanford. Like in Virginia, they're not letting people into UVA at that point. They're not letting women into UVA at that point.
Well, I had gotten really good grades, and my scores and my SAT scores were fine and everything, but it didn't hurt being the daughter of the Secretary of State. Let's be honest. And nobody ever said that, but I'm not stupid, so I'm sure that. And I got a full ride. I got a full scholarship.
What did you major in?
I only went the first year and a half. I mean, I wasn't majoring.
So you
in
hadn't
anything at that
declared.
point. I
You
was
hadn't
taking all the freshman stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I loved it. In fact, I'm waiting to hear back. They told me when I got married I could come back at any time. So I just, the last couple of days, wrote them a letter. And I said, okay, do you mean it? I'm ready to go back. I'm finished. We'll see what happens. But anyway.
What do you think you'll major in?
I don't know. Back then it was liberal arts. What do I know?
You just want to learn
Just
more.
want to learn more. I love Stanford. I really did. And of course we got married out there.
Yeah, at the chapel.
At the chapel. Well, Mem Chu is hardly a chapel. Have you ever seen the?
I saw the pictures of the window. It feels cathedral.
It's huge.
Yeah.
It's beautiful and it's huge. And we got married there. And my father, by that time, the protesters against the war were pretty violent. They were throwing feces and blood and stuff like that, and he didn't want all of that to ruin our wedding.
You got married in 1967.
67. So all of our arrangements were under a false name, so the press wouldn't get word of it. And when we went inside to get married, there wasn't a soul around. But when we came out, different story. All the network newsworks were there with their cameras rolling and all sorts of, it was a mob scene. And that's how all that stuff happened.
Yeah.
And
So you had no warning that there would be
No.
people waiting for you.
no. However, I had one uncle, my mother's brother, who was foreign editor for the Washington Post. And I had another uncle who had been a wartime correspondent for 3 different wars for the Los Angeles Times. I have a feeling maybe they let the cat out of the bag.
A scoop.
A scoop. Yeah. And, but it was a very 15-minute, very simple wedding. I had one bridesmaid. She was a roommate at my first year at Stanford. When I first met her, we had 3 rooms, I had the center room, she was over here. And I introduced myself to her. And we were talking about various things, and for some reason she asked me if I was Lutheran. And I said, no. I said, I don't really go to church anymore, and I'll tell you about that later. But she said, well, you're going straight to hell. But anyway, she was my maid of honor. We got to be best friends.
You got over
to be best friends. It was great. She was my maid of honor. And our reception was at a private home. Small. There were only 60 people at the wedding, mostly friends of my mother's because she lived out west. Or had lived out west.
And Guy's parents were there?
Guy's parents were there. His mother was dying of cancer at the time. We didn't know it.
Mm.
She knew it, but we didn't know it. But he was there. And we honeymooned that weekend at Carmel.
That's beautiful.
Came back to Stanford, and that's when all those big, huge mail sacks of mail were waiting for us. And he had to report to Mineral Wells, Texas for his first session of helicopter training. And we still had horses to haul. So we drove from Stanford to Mineral Wells. And then he had to go to Savannah, and we drove from Mineral Wells, Texas, all the way through the deep south to Savannah. And that was a scary drive, because we knew darn well that,
You couldn't stop at certain places.
we stopped for gas. We were careful then. That's the only time we stopped, was for gas. But we made it. Well, we were late. He was late reporting into his commanding officer. And when he reported the next morning, his commanding officer looked at him and said, well, I thought sure you were dead.
Okay, so you get married. He's done ROTC at Georgetown, and you get married. When did the helicopter training, him being selected for helicopter training, how did that come about? Did he have some sort of training in ROTC?
He had wanted it, he requested.
Okay.
And that's what he did at Mineral Wells in Savannah. Two things where he got the training.
And he went, what was the branch that was an
Army.
Army? And, so do you know the dates of his total service?
It's in that paperwork that I gave you.
Okay. So you were married in 67, and he went into the Army in 67.
Yeah.
And
See, we
then,
married in September, yeah, we went.
for
for
towards the
training,
end of
right.
67. And then he got out in
It's
maybe,
all there. It's a little confusing when I've tried to, because there were two different time periods.
okay, of service,
Uh-huh.
2 different tours? Or
I
is
think
it?
so.
Uh-huh. So did he, so you went to Texas. How long were you in Texas?
Not long.
Like a couple months?
Couple months.
And then you went to Savannah.
Or a month or two. When he went to Savannah, and he had to take his check ride to get his certification. And he's very good mechanically. He was a very good pilot, very good driver, very good on his motorcycle. Yeah, very. He kept failing the last check ride. And like 2 or 3 times, and he couldn't understand why, because he thought he was doing fine. And finally, the head instructor said, I'll tell you why you're failing. Nobody wants to be the person who signs off on you as being qualified and then have something happen to you because of
you.
No, because of Secretary of State.
Yeah,
Because
yeah,
it's being son-in-law of Secretary of State.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to put their career on the line.
Not because he's a black man, but because he is the son-in-law of the Secretary of State.
Yes, exactly.
Ah.
That was the issue.
Uh-huh.
They were scared they were going to get in trouble because
So
of
he
that.
was doing fine.
He was fine. Very good. He was a very good pilot.
Well, how many black helicopter pilots did he work with other ones or with his group?
There weren't a lot. It was not segregated, but there weren't a lot. Somewhere in storage, there's this big picture of everybody in his class, and really there were very few.
But how did he feel about his treatment? I'm sure his father gave him some, like conveyed his experience in the military.
No, but that was, time had passed. I don't think, God's father did not have a chip on his shoulder. I don't think he would have done that. I think everybody was just very proud of him. And it's funny, when he shipped off, I guess, did he leave from California? Probably. My mother and I were there at the airport. My mother was crying because she realized he might not come back or come back badly wounded. It was just like, it's fine. I'm going to see you in whatever time, I was so young and naive and just completely, and I was like, Mom, why are you crying? But she had said goodbye to her husband when he went off to war. She was more understanding about the problems. And I was just, I had fully expected him to do that.
So, he went off to Vietnam, and you guys rode every day. Did you guys ever speak via phone or a radio or something?
Went after Vietnam. I lived in Columbia, Maryland. They had just opened it. I was in one of the first townhouses. I was living there because I was running the stable so we could have our horses there. We still had horses all the time. We're dragging them all over the place, right? And I remember the phone ringing in the middle of the night. I pick up the phone, and I hear this voice from obviously a very long distance away. And the man introduced himself as Guy's commanding officer.
Mm.
And then we got disconnected. So I'm thinking, this is not good.
But you can't call them back.
No, I sat there on this, with my legs hanging down on the bed. I remember thinking to myself, are you a 19-year-old widow? Is that what this call is about? Well, he had called me to tell me that Guy had been wounded, but that he was all right, and he didn't want me to get word from in another way that would have worried me more. So he assured me that Guy was fine. And he said something about, he messed up his mustache a little bit, and I remember saying, what mustache? Because when he left, he didn't have a mustache. But apparently he had come just like this. Another
Glancing.
much and that'd be it.
Mm.
Oh, and through his arm, and then up like this, across his.
But he was able to land the helicopter.
I'm not sure whether he didn't just keep doing it, going. I don't know.
Or, got to a safe place and then he could.
Yeah, right. I don't think he would have landed in it. But I can remember him, he did talk a very little bit about it. He said there was one time, because he didn't fly a gunship, but they had one gun on the ship. But his job was to drop troops off and pick them up. And he said there was one time when he went down and I guess he was waiting to pick guys up and or something, I'm not sure which it was, picking them up or dropping them off. But he said the fire was so intense, he just had to turn the helicopter around so he wouldn't see it all coming. And then another time, they have a weight limit as to how much you can put on a helicopter in order for it to be able to take off. And they had gone to pick up some people, and there were about 2 or 3 Vietnamese men, soldiers, who they couldn't fit, or they had reached their weight limit. And the person said, we can't take them because, we're loaded up as full as we can be. And I do know that he said, we're not leaving anybody behind. He said, shove them in there. And then he had to go for quite a distance along like this until he got up enough airspeed to be able to lift up. But he didn't do it.
Did he talk at all about like holidays while he was in Vietnam, like how they celebrated some sense of normalcy or what he did for recreation?
No.
Mm-mm.
The only thing he mentioned when he got home was one incident when they were in, I don't know if it was an officers club or something. And one of his comrades had taken offense to him being in its unit because he was black. The guy was standing up against a wall, and all of a sudden this knife comes flying and goes into the wall about this far from his face, because the guy was trying to harass him. Just like that guy said. He took that man and slammed him up against the wall and had his gun and stuck it in his mouth. He said, if you do that again, I'm going to blow your head off. And that was the last trouble he had. Yeah.
It's sad that he has, they have to kind of work out their problems that way.
Well, they got worked out because Guy can be very convincing when he wants to be, and I'm sure everybody watching that believed that he would pull the trigger if he,
Was pushed.
yeah.
So when he was injured, did he get did he take time off? Like, did they give him?
I don't think so. He wasn't injured that badly.
And
Yeah.
did he ever get any R&R? Like, did you ever meet him somewhere?
I never met him. I think, oh no, wait, I take that back. We did meet. I'm sorry. That's when we almost died, actually. We met in Honolulu. And he was there for R&R. So I was there for about a week. I went out to Honolulu and we met. We had a great time. And the way we almost died was that he couldn't swim because they just didn't have swimming pools for black people back then. And I couldn't swim because I had chosen to learn how to ride. So you can wade out quite a distance from the beach on Honolulu. And it's still only up to your knees. So we went out pretty far. And then we started walking parallel to the beach. And all of a sudden, we're in over our heads. Neither one of us could swim. And I remember us looking at each other thinking, I can't help you and I know you can't help me. Is this how we're going to die? We're going to die on R&R in Honolulu? Like, really? Because we were in big trouble. Fortunately, what had happened was we had stepped into the catamaran channel. Fortunately, that's where the lifeguards were sitting because they used the catamaran to go out and rescue people. They saw us drowning and they came and got us.
Oh my goodness.
Go figure, right?
Well, I mean, if you're going to wander into some danger, do it in the lifeguard zone.
I can remember we went to the bar after that.
I always think it must be so hard for people that, you know, they were in Vietnam and then they get R&R and then they have to go back. It's kind of like when you don't know what you're going towards, you kind of have like an aloofness.
Right.
And then like, but if you know what you're going back to, then it's like, I'm sure there must be so much.
I know when he got home. Oh, one thing they told them when they were coming home, don't wear your uniform. That's how much protesters were. Can you imagine? So he didn't wear his uniform, and I know when he got home, it took him years to stop having nightmares. And when I say nightmares, I mean just restless sleeping and, you know, talking a little bit in his sleep and stuff like that. A long time to get over it because he really was a very gentle, sweet person. And I think to be around all that killing and all that dying. I know he rode a motorcycle, and when the Vietnam vets started riding their motorcycles up to the wall, the Vietnam Memorial was up there, he would ride with them, but he could never go up to the wall. His entire life, he never actually went all the way up to the wall.
We spoke to a veteran like a week ago, and he has never visited the wall.
Can't do it. Couldn't do it.
Well, he got close.
Huh?
He got close.
He got close. He went on the ride, but he couldn't do it.
So, but when he came back, did he come back to like was he returning home to the DC area on the flight, or was he returning to California, or?
Well, I was back in DC by then.
So.
And he ended up coming home.
It seems like in the small sample that we have been talking to, it seems like there were different experiences depending on the time when you got out of the military or where you were going to. Like one guy, he said he went to Roanoke. He was going back home to Roanoke, and he said that they like rolled out the red carpet for him, and he had, you know, like he was wearing his uniform, but I think maybe he got out earlier in the war.
Before the protests.
It might be, but also I think maybe also it has to do with the location. That Roanoke was probably a more, patriotic kind of stalwart kind of community. But I think in more urban areas, then you're going to have more people who are discontented with the war.
When he got back, he worked for a short period of time flying in and out of the Pentagon. We needed a place to live. I found a 2-line classified ad in the Washington Post for this place down in Stafford, Virginia, which then was just countryside, for $30,000. And his father gave us this 1/3 down payment, and we bought that farm. And we lived there our entire life, with the exception of the last 3 years when we moved into my daughter's townhouse that she had vacated, but still had, because his health was deteriorating.
So you needed to be near medical.
We needed to be in an easier,
Not much upkeep.
situation. And he ended up dying of complications of Agent Orange. And he ended up, the last year of his life, with dementia. He couldn't recognize anybody, even his daughter. The only person he never failed to recognize was me. And his last words to me as he died, because I was with him, were, "I'm so sorry for leaving you alone." So, and ironically, all the years that we lived in Stafford, and it was a very, it was a lovely farm, but it wasn't fancy by any means. Downstairs had oil heat. Upstairs was heated by a wood stove that was downstairs and went up through things. So in the middle of the night, he would go downstairs and add more wood to the stuff. But it had a big barn. It had 23 acres. It was fully fenced. It was on a right-of-way. It wasn't even on a paved road. It was on a right-of-way. And people from time to time would come out and say, sell your farm, what do you want for it? And he'd say $1 million. They'd laugh. Years and years and years went by, and people come, no. Well, after he died, we hadn't been there for 3 years, and it was really run down. And I knew I wasn't going back. This was 47 years later, right? Some commercial group contacted me, wanted to buy the property. It was for sale, yes. And they said, well, what do you want for it? I said, $1 million. Okay. So then a year went by, and they hadn't done anything about it. They'd have these meetings. They were just kind of stringing me along, and me with about 7 other men in their suits and everything. And finally I said, okay, I've been patient. I've waited a year. Do you want the property or not? And they said, I don't know, whatever they said. And I said, you know what? Forget it. I'm taking it off the market. I had to check the next day.
And you got your $1 million.
Yes, I did.
You got Guy's $1 million.
Guy's $1 million. Yeah. Got Guy's $1 million.
Is it a neighborhood now?
Oh my gosh, you haven't been to Stafford? Oh my gosh. Oh, you wouldn't believe.
So what did you guys do on the farm? Did you get horseback riding?
Well, I worked at other barns. He ran the farm. We had a stallion. Actually, it used to belong to John W. Warner. And he was by Nashua. He stood the stallion, and we boarded at home. So he took care of the farm at home, and I did teaching in other barns. We had our daughter, whom he absolutely adored. We both adored her. And she rode all of her junior years, plus she played field hockey for 4 years. She ended up being all Met. We never missed a game. We went to all of her games. When the grandchildren were born, I have pictures of him. He would take the baby, well, when she was born, a baby, and when they were born, he would sit all afternoon holding those babies. And when my daughter was born, and he was still working and had to leave and go, you know, he would get up at 4 o'clock in the morning just to give her that early bottle. I mean, he just, so sweet. Such a loving person. I think that's, you know, the war, he did it because it was his duty. But I'm sure a lot of people that fought over there, if not all, were just, you know, they didn't enjoy. Even if, you know, I think killing is just a hard thing to ask anybody to do.
Just witnessing death.
And witnessing death, and having your friends killed, and the whole thing. It's just tough. In any war. But this war was different. It wasn't quite like World War II, where, you know, we really were.
There was a clear bad guy.
Yes, and it was, everybody felt differently about it. This was much more controversial. I told you my brother went to know. And my father, as the war was going on, he would lie on the living room floor in agony, stomach pains, in agony. He even went to the Mayo Clinic. It wasn't anything but stress. Just
Stress can do amazing things.
I mean, he,
It really wore on him.
yeah. But then that paper explained all different reasons why
Well, that they
he continued.
communism was quite a threat. at
It
the
was,
time.
the Cold War, this was Cold War still, you know. Plus, he had visited Germany in the 30s. Yeah. When the rise of the
Third Reich.
and you're right. He saw the brown shirts marching and all that. As a college student, he had gone over there to visit. And he understood what happens if you don't nip aggression in the bud. Of course, you know, when the Cuban Missile Crisis,
He was involved in that.
I can remember his bedroom and my bedroom were next to each other. And I remember he was gone never came home for about 12, 13 days during that crisis. And Saturday night, the last night, he did come home. I think Kennedy sent everybody home, not knowing whether the ships were going to turn around or not. And I remember getting up early in the morning, walking out my door, and his door was cracked open like this, and my father was sitting on the edge of the bed, still exhausted, in his PJs. And I remember he didn't see me, and I remember him saying to my mother, well, at least we're still here. I think Kennedy sent everybody home to be with their families. Yeah. It was something.
Do you think, how did you and Guy feel about the fall of Saigon? And did you ever speak to your father after Saigon fell about it?
I never spoke to my father about Vietnam at all. I never spoke to Guy about Vietnam at all.
It was just something you didn't talk about.
They had enough of it without me bringing it up. Um, Yeah, my father has given a bunch of interviews about the whole thing. But, it's one thing to look back in hindsight. It's another thing to make decisions while they're happening, and you're not knowing how they're going to turn out. I was with my father when he died. His last breath, his last words were, he was pleased to be taking some secrets to his grave.
What a cheeky fellow.
I'm sure you have.
Yeah. I mean, he definitely has them.
Yeah.
You know that we would want to know what they were.
He was taking them to his grave.
Wow.
Oh, another interesting sideline
Mm-hmm.
has to do with his being Secretary of State. My mother, even in Washington, was having trouble at times. Being unsteady on her feet at times. I think might have been some rumor going around that she drank or something like that. But then they moved to, I don't know if they were already in Georgia. They have already been out of office, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And we had the same obstetrician, gynecologist. He delivered me and he delivered my daughter. So we had our appointments together. And we're walking down the aisle of his office. And he says to my mother, "How's your MS?"
Mm-hmm.
And my mother looked at him and said, "What? What MS? What are you talking about?" She had been diagnosed by the doctors as having multiple sclerosis, but nobody ever told her. They kept it a secret from her. And they had prescribed medicine under an assumed name. And I remember seeing this medicine on her thing, and it wasn't her name on the bottle. And I'm thinking, what's this all about? But I never asked anything. Can you believe it? Never told her.
Now, is this something that had to do with being the wife of the
I
secretary?
think so, because I don't know if back then having MS was some kind of stigma or something. I don't know. Poor mom.
Yeah. I mean, you would think that you could be more proactive than just like whatever you could go see some specialists if you knew.
Well, I'm sure that I think back then they didn't really have any cure or didn't know anything to do. Because they were good doctors, but they figured she'd be better off knowing it. It was kind of intermittent,
Mm-hmm.
but it got worse as she got older.
She would have episodes or...
Yeah, it got worse. But strange
world.
Maybe they didn't want it to get out in the papers. I don't know.
But your family seems so transparent about everything. You know what I mean? If they were going to be hiding things, do you know what I mean? Like your family was like, yes, our daughter is getting married and this is what's happening. And there was never any, they were very proud of you all. And
I think it's just the times. Different times.
yeah.
But I know, like, there were times when Guy and I were married, or even dating, the police would stop us and have us get out and go through the car with a fine-tooth comb trying to find some reason to arrest us or give us a ticket or something like that. I mean, there was definitely harassment from the police. That was in Washington, D.C.
But it wasn't widely known who your father was, so...
No. That's why they did it probably. Or felt like they could. And other things like that happened, just...
It feels like he's getting both sides of the spectrum, though. Like, they didn't want to sign off on him getting his helicopter, last.
Right.
Because
They didn't want to get in trouble.
They didn't want to get in trouble because, but you know, like, but then there are people that are harassing him just by his race.
Right.
So he's getting, you know,
Right. Yeah. So it's just, all I can say is, you know, it's just a time. I mean, the 60s were, you know what the 60s were,
I mean,
you know.
it feels tumultuous now, you know, in terms of, there's like a lot of unsettling in terms of like, do we trust our elections? You know, what is China gonna do? You know, but the 60s, they really feel,
Oh,
you know.
60s is a whole nother story. But you know, Pop was so relaxed about it all. I remember my brother Richard would send his friends to our house to spend, if they were visiting Washington, instead of them having to go to a hotel, they'd send them to our house to sleep in his room and spend a night, 2 nights or whatever. Not even tell my parents, not even be with them, just send them there. They'd get at the door and they'd knock on the door. Richard said we could come here and sleep. And one time they were there for protesting the war. They had their protest signs. And they knocked on the door and they said, you know, Richard said we could come here and sleep. And my father said, sure, come on in, just put your signs right there on the porch.
I guess we're all Americans, right?
Hey.
And we have the right to protest.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, absolutely.
I mean, that's wonderful that he was so.
Oh, yeah. Papa's a very humble man, actually. Very, very sweet. He was really lucky.
Do you have any memories of your grandfather? And because I've read very peripherally that your father's father, that he went to Davidson too, right?
I don't know. My father's father was dead before I.
Oh, he was dead. Okay, because I think they said that he was a minister. Was he a minister? Or?
He tried to be a minister and his voice came out and he had to be a postman. I knew briefly, before she died, my father's mother. They still lived in the house down in Georgia, Atlanta, Georgia. And my aunt, Margaret, whom I was named after, she was the maiden aunt that was supposed to take care of the mother. You know how that goes?
Mm-hmm.
So she lived with her. And actually, Margaret was very forward-thinking for her time. I know while we was down there visiting, 2 men moved in next door, you know, back from the time when you couldn't even say the words, you know, and she was fine with it. And another interesting thing was, you know, they lived through the Depression, and they had all these things up in the attic. They saved all the little toys that were in the cereal boxes, and they had a big thing of those little tiny toys. When I was young, I went down there, and they took me up to the attic so that I could get those toys. And up there were envelopes. There was a big ball of string, and then there was a envelope with shorter pieces of string. And then there was an envelope that had these tiny little things of string. It said, string too short to tie. You know, they wouldn't throw anything away. Nothing. The well was still in the backyard, although they had running water by then. And the outhouse was still in the backyard, although they had indoor plumbing by then.
But how did his family feel about all of this? I mean, he seems just like meteoric, like, you know, your father, like he really like got out from his, you know, upbringing, and he really became one of the.
Well, and he will comment. He's commented on that many times. Of being a poor boy. What a country where a poor boy from Georgia could, you know, come to all this. One thing he did do was read. He read every book he could get his hands on. Go to the library. Read. And he worked for 2 years, I think, before he went to Davidson. And then he got a Rhodes Scholarship. And went to Oxford. And he was very smart. but also very down to earth, humble, hardworking. And when the Christmas that we were home, and Guy and I knew that we were going to get married the following September,
To like 66.
66, we decided to tell my father we were getting married. Guy asked me, did I want him to ask my father for my hand in marriage? And I said, no. For one thing, I'm not property. Number two, what are we gonna do if he says no? We're getting married anyway, so don't bother, you know? So we go in and announce to him that we're gonna get married the following September. Father didn't say a word. He just got up out of his chair and walked upstairs. Didn't say a word. Went back to Stanford. I finished up at Georgetown. It gets to be the spring. I saw a wedding dress that I liked, and I wrote my mom and said, Mom, would you send me $300? Could you loan me $300 so I could buy this wedding dress, because I really like it. Next thing I know, she sent me a check for $1,000. And somewhere between, in that summer, I think she ended up saying to my father, are you really not going to walk your daughter down the aisle? The problem was he went to President Johnson because this marriage, he thought, could cause big problems.
Because they're doing the Civil Rights Act.
Well, at the same time, this was before Loving versus, when we told my parents that we were getting married, this was before Loving versus Virginia. So we could have been thrown in jail in like 19 states. But didn't matter. We were getting married anyway.
But was it legal in California prior
Yes.
to Loving?
Yes.
So, I mean, you were going to get married.
We were going to get married, and, you know, they,
But if you came in to live
right,
in
if they threw
Virginia.
us in jail, they threw us in jail. We were getting married. And so Pop went to President Johnson and told him about the upcoming wedding and offered his resignation because he thought it could be a big problem for President Johnson. Johnson said, forget it, don't worry about it. Yeah. So he came. It was great. He and God got along great.
Do you want to ask a question?
Yeah, when you were telling your dad you're get married, did you even think about that implication?
Did I even think about it?
Think about, like, we're getting married, did you think your dad would, the fact he went to Johnson to submit his resignation, is that something that you?
I didn't think about it.
I know.
I'm a kid.
Yeah. But that's, I mean, yeah, that wouldn't occur to me either.
I heard in an interview you said that he didn't tell you till after you were married that he had gone to Johnson. Did he tell you later, or did you know in the thing? In the moment?
I can't remember whether he told me before or after. I know he did, went go to and offered his resignation. But Johnson, for all of his surface bigotry, was actually, you know, I mean, he's the one that got the Civil Rights Bill through.
Progressive.
You know what I mean?
Mhm.
It was, they were both Southerners that I think understood the complexities and wanted to change, trying to figure out. It was interesting.
How to move society forward.
How to make it happen.
I think we're still trying to figure out.
Well, but
They definitely moved the needle forward.
yeah, the Civil Rights Act was a big thing.
Yeah.
And I remember going to the White House because we hadn't announced our engagement yet, but Lucy was getting married, Lucy Baines.
Mhm.
And the dinner was in her honor of her upcoming marriage. And President Johnson got up to make a toast about how he appreciated all the cabinet children not doing anything to make headlines. And I remember sitting there and saying, oh, just you wait. Thinking to myself, yeah.
I'm gonna rock the world.
But anyway, and you know, we only got married because we loved each other. I mean, we weren't trying to prove anything. We just loved each other.
It's very clear. Sure, you guys were lucky to find each other.
Oh, absolutely.
I'm gonna look through my questions because we've kind of,
Sure, I know.
moved through
Now
it,
we're
but I
all
want to
around.
make sure that I ask you some of, make sure I get the official questions taken care of. So he was always a helicopter pilot. He never had any other job in Vietnam. And he was honorably discharged, and did he receive?
He got a bronze medal,
Mhm.
Purple Heart.
And did he utilize the VA system when he was, like when he started getting health problems, or did you?
No, he did not. I get, as a widow, I get a VA payment because he served me in. But no, he did not. When his father was getting older, Guy took him, I think, to the VA for some health issues, but it was so bad back then.
Mm-hmm.
He just gave up on that. Likewise, he took him to DC General Hospital once for some health issues, and that was so bad. He even gave up on that. So we ended up taking him home with us. And we took care of him until he died. I think its VA's probably come around much better than it was, but it's not good at times, for sure.
It seems like now they're very, at least from the veterans that have come in, not from personal experience, that they understand that there's, like lifelong effects,
Right.
and that they need to kind of study it. And the Agent Orange
Yeah.
really did,
Right. And even next generations, it has affected some children. Yeah, the VA, when I applied for veterans benefits as a widow, if you went to Vietnam, that was it. That's all they needed to know.
Did Guy have any reactions to being in Southeast? Like, I know he didn't talk about Vietnam, but did he talk anything about the culture or experiencing the Vietnamese culture?
No, he really didn't.
Do you know if he had left the country before going to Vietnam? Left the United States before?
Travel or anything?
Mm-hmm.
I don't believe so. I know that there were times on duty, they went across the border to other places besides Vietnam, and that was kind of a hush-hush thing.
In their helicopters? Huh. To like just see a different place?
No. No, this was in combat.
Oh, uh-huh.
This wasn't Georgia.
Oh, you're saying, in an official capacity?
Yes.
Uh-huh.
But
So
I
like
wasn't-
Cambodia or
Right,
something?
but I
Uh-huh.
didn't really talk about that, because I think that's kind of a no-no.
I know I'm kind of beating a dead horse right now, but did he feel proud of his service in Vietnam? Do you think that
Yes. Yes. He felt it was his duty to go. He did his very best while he was there. He didn't apologize for any of it. Yes.
Um, do you think that the Vietnam War impacted how he felt about subsequent American involvements in military, like Iraq, and 'cause he would have been alive when Iraq, when we.
He died 11 years ago. We didn't talk about it.
Mhm. Was he involved in it, any veterans organizations? You said
No.
that he rode his motorcycle.
Only the ride did walk.
Um, do you have a feeling about what the biggest misconception about the Vietnam War is?
Well, I'm not sure that there's a consensus. It's so complicated. And I think if you look back to World War II and all that happened, people that fought in World War II, the fact that we were late getting into it, and that all those terrible things happened, maybe they could have been prevented if somebody had taken action sooner, who knows. I think, ironically, that when the United States goes to war somewhere, it's trying to do the right thing. I don't think the United States is. They don't want, we don't need anything from all these countries. We're not trying to prove anything. We're not trying, it's just, we feel like the Cold War, we need to stand up to, we need to support treaties like SEATO, that kind of thing, NATO, SEATO, we need to be the peacekeeper. Ironically, we go to war to be the peacekeeper. We can't let things get too far, because then the war will be worse. I don't know, it's very complicated. Are there mistakes made? Sure. Are there misjudgments made? Sure. I think our motives were always good, although I know some people think it was just a big industrial military complex trying to make a bunch of money and stuff like that. I'm sure part of that enters into it. I'm not so naive as to think that it doesn't. But I don't know. It's complicated.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I know initially, I think my father did not want to get involved. And then,
As information came.
mhm. I don't know.
Well, are there any questions you wish that I had asked you that I haven't? Okay.
Can't think of anything.
Do you all have any questions you want to ask?
One question, and maybe you mentioned it and I didn't catch it, but your oldest brother, who's 9 years old,
David.
right? David, thank you. He had his family, I mean, and moved and had his family, and that was it. Was he have any involvement?
In the war?
Mhm.
No, he was older. I don't know exactly why. He didn't seem to be involved. He was older, he was already married. He had kids. David actually is the most like my father. Very intellectual, reads a lot. Very does not show his emotions.
Reserved.
Yes, very much like my father. Still lives. He's been married 62 years. He lives in D.C. Met his wife in Scarsdale when she came as an exchange student to the high school, and he was assigned to show her around.
She was an exchange student from a foreign country?
From Argentina.
Argentina.
Yep. And that was all she read. He was mayor of Albuquerque at one point.
Mayor of Albuquerque, New Mexico?
He's written a couple books on cities and city planning and all that kind of thing. But he's the brain in the family. I'll tell you a funny story that's just got nothing to do with any of this.
That's fine.
While my brother was out in Albuquerque as mayor, and my parents were out there, and Richard and me, we all went out for a family reunion, I guess. So we were all there. And it was when the obscenity issue had come up before the Supreme Court. And one of the justices said, "I can't define it, but I know it when I see it." Remember that? It was being debated in the family between David and my father. Well, as it so happened, at that moment, in Albuquerque, there was a triple feature playing. Deep Throat, The Devil and Miss Jones, and some other thing. And my father and the mayor, my brother, thought we should all go to make a
point of obscenity.
to make a point, to investigate, right?
A family affair.
So, they went. My brother Richard, as soon as the first one, which I think was Deep Throat, started showing, my brother Richard just got up and left. He was so embarrassed. He couldn't stand being there with his, family. My mother just started giggling her head off, And David and my father watched about 5 minutes, got bored, and said, "Okay, we've seen it. We're out of here." And they just all left.
Did they decide it was obscene?
I don't know. They decided, I don't know, but that is an odd story, isn't it?
That's a great story.
Go figure. I think they were glad that they weren't spotted by anybody that,
Could report back.
yeah.
The
But
age
anyway.
before cell phones.
Huh?
Cell phone pictures.
That was their, well, they didn't have cell phones back
Right,
then.
right.
That would have made, that's how far they carried investigating things, Oh my gosh. What else can I tell you?
So in Stafford, did you find Stafford hospitable to your interracial family, or?
We lived on the farm and practically saw nobody. There wasn't a regular road to it. It was a right of way, it was dirt. Nobody bothered us.
Do you feel like the community was accepting, or do you feel like it was your
They weren't there.
isolation?
Probably didn't know we were there. I mean, really, it was a very rural situation. Other than that, the couple times we were driving somewhere when the police stopped us in D.C., We never got any threats there. My daughter did fine. She went to school. No, we were really kind of looked, we led a very peaceful, quiet, happy life.
Was that your husband's goal all along, was to have a farm?
No, not particularly.
So was it your goal to have a farm? What led to the,
Well, we had horses, and we needed someplace to keep them. And the price was right. $30,000 we could afford. And thanks to his father. But now, oh, I'll tell you one more thing about Guy. Did I tell you about the turkeys?
mm-mm.
Shows you how much of a sweetheart he was. There were wild turkeys. And we didn't have much money. Not that we were starving, but I mean, we were careful with money and stuff. And there were some wild turkeys, and he said, I'm going to get one of those wild turkeys so we can have a turkey to eat. Well, wild turkeys are notoriously difficult to find. So he'd go out every day with his rifle and look for them. Of course, they, couldn't find 'em. One day, he went down a lane, and there they were. And he said he put his rifle up to his, side of the knee. He said, I just can't pull the trigger. They haven't done a darn thing to me.
No.
And he came home. Couldn't kill him.
Because he had, Vietnam was enough.
Well, he'd seen enough. Fortunately, I don't think he had to kill anybody personally himself, but he certainly saw enough of it. But I don't think I never got the impression that he thought we were wrong to go, or he just felt like he was doing his duty. It wasn't up to him to decide whether right or wrong to go. He had to do his duty. And then, of course, my brother Richard was different, It's like, he thought it was wrong. He didn't go, but he just had to get away from it.
Did he go to college?
Richard
Mhm.
went to Cornell.
And his boot camp was after Cornell, or?
I think so.
And then what did he do in Alaska for a
Oh,
job?
he built houses, which is not an easy thing to do on permafrost, because you can't dig into the ground. He was an excellent
Builder?
of all sorts of things. He was really, in many ways, the most talented of the three of us. And the sweetest. I look up to Richard as being, the best of the three of us, for sure. Unfortunately, when he came, and he's the one that came back to take care of Mom and Pop in their older years. And he was wonderful about it. But after they had passed away, one day he just went to an overpass and jumped.
Hmm.
What I think had happened, he played a lot of football in high school and had 3 or 4 concussions that made him, bad concussions. So that when he went to Cornell, they wouldn't even let him play football. And you know that new
Yeah.
seed, whatever it is? I'm
The-
sure that's what had happened to him. And he recognized it because he was losing his ability to do all sorts of things. And he recognized it, and he decided he was just going to take
And
it. Yeah. And it was the weirdest thing. He had a really funny grin, very iconic for him. And I don't know how he did it, but the mortician
Fixed his face.
Fixed him like I thought sure he was still alive when I walked in there. He had that grin, that classic grin. It was amazing. So that's what happened to Richard.
Hmm.
But he left a son, a wonderful son,
Hmm.
that I still stay in touch with.
Yeah, it's hard. You know, they're still kind of developing the, you know, science on that,
Yeah,
you know, the
but I'm
brain
sure, because he was
disease.
having some trouble before he did that, and I even took him to try to get some help for him, and
They didn't have the
they didn't.
skills to,
help him.
mm-hmm.
And, he was great.
So he left Alaska to take care of your parents, or had he moved somewhere else?
No, he had left Alaska to take care of his mom. They were both in wheelchairs by then, and he did a fantastic job of taking care of him. Every year there was a meeting of the former secretaries of state, and my father looked forward to those meetings so much. And I remember being with him the first year that he was not invited to come because of his age and disability. And I think that's when my father decided, okay, it was time to go. Because it really, and you know, he had macular degeneration, he couldn't see very well. He was certainly getting old and he was feeble, but that was really, okay, I'm done. You know?
Kind of gave him,
It made him feel
yeah, that,
his age and so forth.
but it's sad when somebody's mentally still
Yeah, but he had
able to
yeah.
contribute.
But you know, he did a great job down at the university. He was a professor. Can you imagine having him as your professor with all that he?
And that was at University of Georgia?
Yeah, and they built a building and named it after him, a law school or something like that. I mean, they did a good job. Initially, when he went down to be a professor, one of the Board of Regents vetoed him doing it because of my marriage. But somehow it was overturned or something. Got the professors.
There's no correlation to,
Anyway. So, he did did I tell you about when I asked my father that we had never talked?
when you asked your father,
Well, two times. One in New York, once when we were living in Scarsdale, and I was like 10 or something, I said, 9 or 10, "Pop, we never talk about anything. You and I never talk about anything together," which we didn't. And he said, "You're right." And he said, "Wait a minute." He went in his office and he got out a little miniature version like this, and he handed it to me. He said, "Read this and we'll talk about it." It's the Charter of the United Nations.
I want to bond with my daughter.
Yeah, right? Okay, Bob.
So then what happened the second time?
Let's see, the other time. Oh, yes, he was up visiting somewhere. He would tour around. This was while he was still in pretty decent shape, making speeches, talking to people. He, by the way, made a great speech at Runnymede with the Queen there. That's about, but it was a great speech. Anyway, and I went to visit him because it had been a while since I've seen him. He was getting on in age. And I was going to say, oh, we're going to press it again. We never talk. We have, in our whole lives, we have never had a conversation. You know, it was really eating at me. So he was sitting over here there. He was a 2-pack-a-day Chesterfield smoker, by the way. And he was glad to see me. I sat down and I was going to have it out with him, right? And he said, he got up from his chair and he walked over here to get his cigarettes and walked back. And when I saw him walk over here, I thought, he is an old man. It is too late. You cannot have this talk now. You waited too long. It is too late. I never said anything.
Oh,
But it was something.
yeah, I mean, in terms of having a father, I mean, your father's incredibly documented and, you know, you can,
As sweet as he could be, kind. As far as how he'd sit out on the lawn with his, he had a bald head, and he tied 4 corners to a handkerchief, and he put it on top of his head as kind of a sunscreen, and he'd sit there and weed dandelions. He was as sweet as he could be. So the Vietnam thing, and I know that it bothered him a lot. But didn't know what to do about it.
sometimes being a leader is choosing from a slate of bad choices, choosing the best one.
Yeah, you just have to do what you do.
With the information you have at the time.
So, that's it.
Well, thank you so much for coming here and speaking to us.